The maid's daughter climbed onto the bed of a billionaire in Coma. What happened shocked the hospital. In the icy silence of a luxury hospital, where even the corridors seemed suspended in time, a surprising scene changed everyone's fate. The humble cleaning lady discreetly entered the room of her wealthy boss, who is now in a coma after a tragic accident. However, she was not alone. His little daughter, dressed in red, ran to the bed and, before the astonished doctors and nurses, climbed in without hesitation beside the most influential man in the city. What that child did next not only stunned the entire hospital but also exposed a wound and a truth no one was ready to face. Before you begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and activate the bell, because here you can follow the most exciting stories on YouTube, and this one will affect you. Tomorrow, Monday, began like any other at the Caldwell Mansion. Located in New York City's most upscale neighborhood, Carmen Smith, 34, woke up in her modest apartment in Bronx at 5:30 in the morning. As a single mother, she raised her 6-year-old daughter, Isabella, with the strength and determination of someone who had always faced hardships. Isabella was a unique child, unlike any other. Her large, expressive eyes seemed to perceive more than one would expect for her age. Since childhood, she had possessed knowledge she shouldn't have, felt pain that wasn't hers, and dreamed of people she'd never met. Carmen had already learned to accept her daughter's peculiar gift, passed down through the women in her family for generations. "Mommy," Isabella said, still sleepy that morning, "I dreamed of a sad man again. He was in a very large house, but he was alone and crying." Carmen sighed. Isabella used to see her dreams come true. "What a guy, darling, tall with green eyes." He was yelling into the phone. But inside, he was quite sad, and there was a small girl with him, fair hair. Carmen felt a shiver run down her spine. She had worked in the Caldwell family home for 5 years, always discreet and inconspicuous. She was familiar with every nook and cranny of the mansion. She was aware of the habits of Edward Caldwell, the wealthy 38-year-old boss who made her feel like part of the furniture. Edward was tall and had green eyes, and Carmen had seen photos of a blonde girl in the library. He kept them in a locked drawer, but she had discovered them by chance while cleaning. A girl who seemed to mean a lot to him, yet no one mentioned it. The journey to the South Zone was long, taking 2 hours on overcrowded buses, where Carmen was squeezed in among other workers like her, all heading to look after the homes of people whose names they didn't even know. At 8 o'clock sharp, she passed through the electronic gate of the majestic 3-story mansion. That morning, Edward Caldwell descended the stairs with his usual arrogance. As heir to a real estate empire, he spoke loudly on the phone about multi-million-dollar deals, gesturing impatiently. While completely ignoring Carmen's presence, as he always did, his footsteps echoed across the marble. "Finalize this transaction today." "I'm not going to accept any more delays," he exclaimed into the phone. Straightening the Italian suit that was worth more than Carmen's 6 months' salary. As usual, Carmen looked away as he passed her, but that day something was different. A strange feeling crept into his chest, the same one he'd experienced the night his father died years before. It was as if the air had thickened, as if fate were about to change. Edward got into his red Ferrari, his favorite toy, and sped off. On the rainy morning, the tires screeched on the damp asphalt. Carmen continued her cleaning routine, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. The mansion's phone rang at 2 in the afternoon, just as she was organizing the library. Mrs. Constance, the housekeeper, responded in her usual formal voice, but Carmen noticed her face growing progressively pale. "Accident. Owns Hopkins Hospital. Critical condition." Carmen could only hear these words from the hallway. Her heart raced. Now, The strange feeling of the morning made sense. She had a feeling something was going to happen to Edward. Within minutes, the house was in chaos. Robert Caldwell, Edward's younger brother, was the first to arrive in his black BMW, talking loudly on the phone with lawyers. Margaret, his wife, got out of a white Mercedes, her eyes red from crying behind her designer sunglasses. Sophia Caldwell, their mother, was the last to arrive. At 65, she was a woman who had dedicated her life to visiting beauty salons and participating in social clubs. But in that moment, all her elegance was gone. Supported by a private nurse, she trembled like a leaf. Sophia cried for her son, her little boy. How could this have happened to him? "Mom, you need to be strong," Robert said, trying hard to remain calm. "The doctors are doing everything they can and can't." Carmen, leaning against the kitchen wall, watched from a distance. That family that had always seemed so influential was completely broken, and for reasons she couldn't understand, she had the feeling their pain was also hers. Edward had been involved in a serious accident on the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, BQE Highway. His Ferrari had slid on the wet road and rolled over multiple times. He was admitted to the ICU at Owens Hopkins Hospital in a coma, suffering multiple fractures and head trauma. Everyone arrived at the hospital in a convoy, and the mansion was empty and silent. Carmen finished her work with tears in her eyes, unable to understand why she felt so connected to the tragedy. When she picked up Isabella from daycare at 5 in the afternoon, the girl ran into her arms wearing her favorite red dress, a simple piece her great-grandmother had handmade before she passed away. "Mommy," Isabella said on the bus, "the man of my dreams is sleeping right now. A deep sleep in a white bed." Carmen felt her heart freeze. "How did you come to this conclusion, love? I've been dreaming about him for a long time. He carries a deep sadness in his heart because of a little girl who passed away. Laura, I believe her name is Carmen, nearly passed out." Isabella had never visited the mansion, never looked at the photos, never learned about Laura. How could a 6-year-old know about Edward's sister, who died when he was still a teenager? "Mommy," Isabella continued with a peculiar determination that overcame her at times, "we need to go visit him." "Isabella, dear, we can't do this. This isn't our place. But he's alone and afraid inside his own mind. When we're alone and afraid, we need someone to support us." Carmen lay awake that night reflecting. Before the accident, Isabella had already dreamed about Edward. She had mentioned Laura, his sadness, and aspects that were impossible to know. And now she insisted they needed to go to the hospital. Her maternal intuition and years of living with her daughter's unique gift led her to believe that Isabella did, in fact, have a special connection with Edward. But how could a cleaning lady from the outskirts of the city access the city's most sophisticated hospital to visit her wealthy boss? The next morning, instead of heading to the mansion, Carmen made a decision that would change their lives forever. She picked up Isabella early from daycare and headed to the Syrian-Lebanese hospital. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Isabella asked, squeezing her mother's hand. "To visit someone very special who needs our help," Carmen replied, still not fully understanding the reason for her action. As mother and daughter made their way to the hospital, they never imagined they would one day be there, the bus rocking through the streets of New York City. Isabella was silent but resolute, as if she were fully aware of what she needed to do. Carmen was unaware that her choice, taking her daughter dressed in red to visit a man in a coma, was about to shake the foundations of the country's most renowned hospital and irrevocably alter the fate of everyone involved. The Syrian-Lebanese hospital was impressive in its magnitude. The polished marble walls reflected crystal chandeliers, and the aroma was a sophisticated combination of disinfectant and expensive flowers. which were regularly delivered to VIP patients. Carmen had never been in such a luxurious place before. "Can I help you?" asked the receptionist, a middle-aged, elegantly dressed woman who was sizing Carmen and Isabella up and down. It was clear their modest attire was inappropriate for this ostentatious setting. "I've come to visit Mr. Edward Caldwell," Carmen said, struggling to keep her voice steady despite her nerves. "Are you a relative?" The question was asked with suspicion and judgment. Carmen hesitated. How could she explain that she was just the cleaning lady, yet her daughter had dreamed of him? "I've been working for this family for 5 years. The receptionist frowned and made a few calls, speaking quietly to someone from management. After several minutes of awkward waiting, he finally waved, hesitantly. 10th floor, VIP section, only 15 minutes, and the child mustn't make a sound. The elevator ascended silently, and Carmen felt the weight of responsibility with each floor. Isabella squeezed her hand firmly, but showed no sign of nervousness. Instead, she seemed strangely calm, as if acutely aware of her destination. The 10th floor corridor was a distinct universe, as silent as a temple, with luxurious rooms that resembled suites in a 5-star hotel. Nurses moved discreetly, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The air conditioning maintained the ideal temperature, while the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the delicate aroma of imported cleaning products. A gold plaque was affixed to room 1314, Edward Caldwell, Private ICU. Through the bulletproof glass door, Carmen saw Edward for the first time, not as the arrogant boss, but as a delicate and vulnerable man. He was different. His face, usually haughty and intimidating, was swollen and marred with purple bruises. Tubes were inserted into his mouth and nose, connecting him to machines that flashed lights. Wires taped to his chest tracked each faint beat of his heart. Her hands, which used to gesticulate impatiently in business meetings, now rested on the white hospital sheet. "Mommy, is he sleeping?" "He's sleeping very soundly, my daughter," Carmen replied, tears welling up in her eyes at the sight of Edward in such a state, Isabella whispered, approaching the door. As they entered, 2 nurses watched them curiously. Carmen and Isabella weren't part of that privileged world, that much was clear. The older nurse, with grey hair and a maternal expression, approached discreetly. "Are you related to the patient?" "I work for the family," Carmen repeated, feeling belittled by that explanation. "The visit needs to be very brief," the nurse said with professional kindness. "He's in critical condition, in a deep coma for 2 days." Carmen nodded and walked slowly toward the bed, as if about to enter a sacred space. Constant sounds filled the room, the rhythmic beeps of the heart monitor, the mechanical hum of the ventilator, the soft hum of the machines keeping Edward alive. The monitor displayed irregular, low-intensity waves. His blood pressure was alarmingly low. The electroencephalogram showed nearly horizontal lines, signaling minimal brain activity. According to the doctors, the chances of recovery were slim to none. Isabella let go of her mother's hand and went straight to bed. There was no fear or hesitation, just a silent resolve that Carmen recognized well. It was the same expression her daughter wore when her special gift revealed itself. "Isabella, be careful," Carmen began. However, her daughter had already done something surprising. Isabella gently touched Edward's hand with her small, warm fingers. The touch was subtle and delicate, but the impact was instantaneous and surprising. The heart monitors began to emit distinct noises. The rhythm, which had previously been slow and unstable, became stronger and more consistent. The lines on the electrocardiogram display, which had previously barely moved, began to form higher and more constant peaks. Blood pressure, which had been at critical levels, showed signs of stabilization. Is this normal?" Carmen asked. Alarmed by the sudden response from the machines, the two nurses exchanged looks of utter bewilderment. The more experienced nurse, with over 20 years of experience in the ICU, had never witnessed anything like it. "It must be coincidence," she murmured to her colleague, but her voice betrayed doubt. "Sometimes coma patients show fluctuations in their vital signs." However, Isabella didn't take her eyes off Edward's face. It was as if she were perceiving something the adults couldn't, hearing a conversation only she could hear. She gripped his hand more firmly and began to speak softly. "You don't need to be afraid," she whispered in her soft, childlike voice. "I know it's dark in there and you can't find your way out, but I'm here with you. You're not isolated." The words had an even more dramatic effect than the touch. The machines reacted more intensely, displaying vital signs that were close to normal. The electroencephalogram began to register more active waves, signaling brain activity that had not been present before. Carmen felt a chill run through her entire body. In the silent room, her daughter's words seemed to resonate with a force that went beyond the physical. For a moment, everyone present seemed suspended in time, witnessing something that defied any medical explanation. The hospital's chief neurologist, Dr. Henry Moore, chose to make his morning rounds at precisely that moment. He was 55 years old, with grey hair and reading glasses. He was a world-renowned authority. He had treated presidents and celebrities, but he had never witnessed what he found when he entered room 314. "What's going on here?" he asked, turning to the nurses and immediately noticing the surprising presence of Carmen and Isabella. "Doctor!" The patient's vital signs suddenly improved when the child touched him, the older nurse reported, her voice filled with disbelief. "Doctor!" Enrique approached the monitors, adjusted his glasses, and analyzed the data with an expression of growing astonishment. The numbers he'd checked an hour earlier were completely different from the ones he saw now. "This doesn't make medical sense," he muttered to himself. There had been a drastic increase in his brain activity. Her heart rate is almost regular. He observed Isabella, who held Edward's hand naturally, as if it was something completely normal. The girl didn't seem intimidated by the famous doctor's presence or the sophisticated equipment around her. "Girl," the doctor said. Enrique, bending down to Isabella's level, asked, "What are you doing?" Isabella looked at the doctor with her large, serious eyes, which seemed to conceal knowledge beyond her years. "I'm talking to him. He hears what I say." "How are you sure he hears you, dear? Because before he was crying inside his head. Now he's stopped crying." Dr. Henry felt a shiver run down his spine. After 30 years of medical practice, he had learned to trust scientific data, though he had also witnessed phenomena that science could not yet fully explain. "And what else do you notice?" he asked, with genuine curiosity. He feels less lonely now. Before, he was in a very dark house looking for someone, a small girl with fair hair. Carmen and Dr. Henry exchanged glances. How could Isabella know about Laura, Edward's sister who had died decades ago? Dr. Marina called the doctor, Enrique called a nurse. "I want these vital signs monitored continuously. Record any changes, no matter how small." He turned to Carmen with a respectful look, something she had never experienced from someone of that social class. "Are you the young lady's mother?" "Yes, doctor. I've been doing domestic work for this family for 5 years. Dr. Enrique nodded in agreement, but his attention was focused on the medical phenomenon he was witnessing. As a scientist, he couldn't disregard empirical data, even if it contradicted his understanding. "I'll order complete neurological exams," the nurses said. "I want an MRI and a detailed electroencephalogram." Isabella continued her silent conversation with Edward while the doctor took notes. Carmen couldn't hear everything, but a few words made her tremble. Laura, I'm sorry. It wasn't your fault. The machines continued to show consistent improvement. Edward showed stable vital signs and significant brain activity for the first time since the accident. In 30 years of neurology, Dr. Henry murmured to his assistants. I've never seen a neurological response like that. Isabella finally let go of Edward's hand and turned to her mother. Mommy, he's better now. He's no longer disoriented in the dark house. Carmen hugged her daughter, still trying to understand everything that had happened in those extraordinary 15 minutes. Can we leave? Isabella asked. Of course, dear. However, I'll be back tomorrow. He's still depending on me. Carmen was approached by Dr. Henry, who had overheard the conversation. Ma'am, what I saw here is incredible. I would be very happy if you could come back tomorrow. As a doctor, I need to understand what's going on. Carmen nodded, still stunned by everything. As they were about to leave the room, she turned to look at Edward once more. At that moment, she felt her eyelids flutter slightly, as if she were trying to wake up. Isabella tugged at her mother's skirt in the silent hospital corridor. Mommy, he told me something important. What happened, my dear? That you always showed him kindness, even when he didn't reciprocate, and that it always meant something deep to him, more than you can imagine. Carmen began to cry. It was a fact. For 5 years, even when Edward treated her coldly, she was respectful and caring, and somehow he had noticed. The news spread through the corridors of the Owens Hopkins Hospital like a whisper that gained strength and multiplied with every door, every shift, every employee who heard the surprising story. Did you hear what happened in 314? Just by touching the patient, a child managed to improve his vital signs. Unfeasible. This isn't found in medicine. However, I've seen the graphs with my own eyes. Nurses who had worked at that hospital for decades had never witnessed anything like it. Radiology technicians left their work to discuss the case in the hallways. Physical therapists, nutritionists, pharmacists, everyone knew the story of the girl in the red dress who caused an inexplicable medical phenomenon at Alavipe. Dr. Zenrique spent the entire night studying the information Edward provided. The MRIs revealed something that left him utterly perplexed. Regions of the brain that had been nearly inactive since the accident began to show signs of renewed activity. The electroencephalogram showed brainwave patterns that indicated information processing at higher levels than before Isabella's visit. This goes against everything we know about coma states, he told his team during the morning meeting, holding the scans with trembling hands. If we can understand what happened yesterday, it could transform how we treat neurological patients worldwide. A different atmosphere had already set in the next morning when Carmen and Isabella arrived at the hospital. The hallways were busier than usual, with staff members casting curious glances and making excuses to pass by Alavipe, and doctors from other departments dropping by for unexplained appointments. Isabella didn't seem fazed by the extra attention. She greeted the nurses as if they were long-time friends and clutching her rag doll under her arm, walked purposefully to room 314. Good morning, she said politely to the doctors present, using the courtesy Carmen had taught her. May I speak to him now, doctor? Enrique, who had arrived an hour earlier specifically to accompany the visit, nodded, displaying a scientific curiosity mixed with an almost childlike anticipation. Of course, dear. Let's observe with respect. Isabella walked over to the bed. Edward was still hooked up to the same machines, but there was a subtle change in his appearance. The facial swelling had subsided slightly, the bruises were less visible, and his breathing, though still assisted by machines, seemed more natural and regular. "Hi," Isabella said, holding his hand familiarly. "As promised, I'm back. I brought my doll for you to see." Immediately, as if the machines had been waiting for this moment, the monitors began responding even more dramatically than the day before. The heartbeat accelerated healthily, blood pressure stabilized at near normal levels, and the electroencephalogram began to show waves indicating intense brain activity. "My God," one of the nurses murmured, observing the changes in the numbers in real time. "It's even more surprising than yesterday." Dr. Henry addressed the monitors, making quick notes on his clipboard. As a meticulous scientist, he had to record every detail. As an experienced physician, he was witnessing something that defied decades of neurological understanding. Isabella began a conversation with Edward as if he were fully awake and aware. Isabella shared details of her morning, from the breakfast her mother had prepared to the yellow butterfly she had spotted on the way to the hospital, and also mentioned her doll's concern for him. "You know," Isabella said, adjusting the blanket over Edward with a gesture of maternal care. "My great-grandmother used to say that even when people are sound asleep, they can still hear those who truly care about them. Can you hear me? Can't you?" It was then that something extraordinary happened, something that left the room completely silent. A tear escaped Edward's closed eye. A genuine, warm tear slowly slid down his cheek, finally falling onto the white hospital pillow. Everyone present stood still. Dr. Henry dropped his clipboard on the floor. The nurses exchanged looks of utter astonishment. Carmen clapped her hands over her mouth, stifling a gasp. "Doctor!" whispered one of the nurses, her voice trembling. Is this medically viable?" Dr. Henrique approached Edward and examined his face carefully. The tear was undeniably real, fresh, an authentic emotional reaction. Patients in deep comas do not produce emotional tears. It was a medical impossibility widely documented in the neurological literature. "No," Dr. Henrique said, his voice trembling. "This shouldn't happen. In theory, it's completely impossible." However, Isabella didn't seem surprised by what had happened. She grabbed a tissue from the bedside table and, with infinite delicacy, wiped away the tear that was streaming down Edward's face. "You don't have to cry," she whispered tenderly. "And Laura is fine where she is. She asked me to tell you that she forgives you and that you no longer need to carry such heavy sadness in your heart." Carmen felt her legs weaken. Isabella continued talking about Laura as if she had met her in person, as if they had spoken the day before. How could a 6-year-old child know the deepest aspects of the guilt Edward had carried for over 20 years? "Doctor," Henrique addressed Carmen with an urgency bordering on scientific desperation. "Ma'am, please, I need an explanation. Has your daughter displayed these abilities before?" Carmen hesitated, but understood she could no longer hide the truth. "Since she was born, Doctor, she's always known things she shouldn't have. She dreams of strangers, feels other people's pain, and anticipates future events." "What about your family? Was there anyone else with these abilities? What about my grandmother and great-grandmother?" "The women in our family have always been distinguished. This talent has always been present." Isabella continued her extraordinary session with Edward while the adults chatted. She told stories, sang lullabies her great-grandmother had taught her, and occasionally questioned him as if she could hear answers no one else could. "Did you play with Laura in Grandma's backyard when you were little?" she asked. The monitors showed positive spikes. "Did you build doll houses together?" Another positive response from the devices. "Is that why you felt guilty when she got sick?" This time, the devices displayed a more intense agitation, as if Edward were reliving deep, painful feelings. "Calm down," Isabella said, holding his hand more firmly. Laura doesn't want you to feel guilty. She said that occasionally little people get sick and go to heaven, but that's never the responsibility of the one who remains. It just happens. Doctor Henry meticulously recorded every word, every response from the equipment, and every detail of that surreal session. As a doctor, he was aware that he was witnessing something unprecedented. As a human being, he was being profoundly affected by something that went beyond science. The visit lasted over an hour, exceeding the allotted 15 minutes. However, no one dared interrupt. Throughout the time Isabella was at Edward's side, his vital signs remained stable and gradually improved. Even more remarkable was the fact that Edward began to exhibit small, involuntary movements. When Isabella spoke, his fingers twitched slightly, his eyelids fluttered as if he were in a deep dream, and his head moved almost imperceptibly toward her voice. "See," Isabella commented to Dr. Henry, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He's trying to wake up. He just needs a little more time to find his way again." When Isabella finally said goodbye, promising to return the next day, Edward appeared completely different. His face was flushed, his breathing calmer. Furthermore, the monitors indicated that his brain activity was approaching normal levels. As they waited for the elevator in the hallway, Dr. Henry approached Carmen with a look that combined admiration and scientific bewilderment. "Ms. Carmen, what's happening here is extraordinary. In my entire medical career, I've never witnessed anything like it." Carmen nodded, still absorbing the depth of what she had witnessed. "Doctor, we are simple people. We have no intention of causing trouble or attracting attention." "I completely understand," Dr. Henry said gently. "What your daughter is doing could be crucial in helping thousands of neurological patients in the future." Isabella grabbed her mother's skirt. "Mommy, will he get better?" Dr. Henry bent down to the girl's level. "I think so, dear. He's finding his way back because of you." "What about the other patients at the hospital? They're talking about us." Carmen, Dr. Henry, and she exchanged glances. Indeed, the news had spread throughout the hospital. "A little," Dr. Henry confessed, "but what you did is very unique. Doctors from all over the world will be interested in learning how you helped Edward." Isabella reflected for a moment, with the seriousness that sometimes overcame her. Okay, but my only wish is for him to be happy again. Laura said he was sad for a long time." That afternoon, Dr. Henry called a special meeting with all the hospital's healthcare professionals. The conference room was packed with neurologists, psychiatrists, pediatricians, and even hospital administrators. "Colleagues," the doctor said, "Enrique, by showing you the graphs of Edward's scans, we are witnessing a phenomenon that could transform our understanding of states of consciousness and neurological recovery." The data was clear. In just 2 days, Edward showed neurological improvement that under normal conditions would take months to occur, if at all. "That's scientifically impossible," protested a more conservative neurologist. "Children don't have healing powers." "I would have agreed with you until yesterday," Dr. Henry replied. "However, the data is clear, and if there's something we don't yet understand about human connection, empathy, and the power of authentic presence, then we should investigate it." At home, Carmen tried to explain to Isabella the significance of what was happening. "Daughter, you saved Edward's life. You accomplished something the doctors thought was impossible." Isabella shrugged, as if it were completely normal. "I just answered Laura's request. She said Edward needed to realize that someone truly cared about him." "And now? What else did Laura tell you?" Isabella smiled with that air of someone who possessed a knowledge adults didn't yet have. "That tomorrow will be a unique day. Edward will truly begin to awaken." Carmen shivered. Isabella's predictions always came true. How do you know? In the dreams I had last night, Laura was smiling and said her work was almost done. Isabella looked at her mother with a look that seemed to contain all the wisdom in the world. He heard me. "Mom," she said simply, but with such conviction that Carmen was convinced she had truly witnessed a miracle. Carmen couldn't sleep that night. Isabella's words echoed in her mind like a constant echo. How could her daughter know so much about Edward? How could Isabella know intimate details about Laura, a child who died decades before her own birth? She got out of bed and went to the small kitchen to make herself some chamomile tea. Through the apartment window, she gazed at the city that never completely sleeps. New York City vibrated with its nighttime lights, but at that moment, Carmen felt alien to her daily routine, as if she had entered a universe where the usual rules didn't exist. Isabella entered the kitchen, pulling her rag doll, her curly hair disheveled from a restless night's sleep. "Can't sleep. Mommy, I keep thinking about everything that's happening. My daughter. Can you tell me more about your dreams about Edward?" Isabella sat in the chair next to her mother, swinging her legs that didn't quite reach the floor, as she always did when she was about to tell something important. "I started dreaming about him a long, long time ago, Mommy. Long before you started working at his house." Carmen felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "Love. When exactly? I first dreamed about him when I was 3 years old. He found himself in a large, beautiful house, but he was alone in a dark room, crying. And there was always a small girl by his side with very light hair and eyes as blue as the sky." Carmen felt her heart race violently. Isabella was only 6 now, which meant that 3 years ago, when she was just 3, she already dreamed of Edward and Laura. However, that was impossible. Carmen had no knowledge of the Caldwell family at the time. She worked as a cleaner in other houses and had never heard of Edward. "Tell me more about those dreams, Isabella." The girl in the dream was quite ill. She had a high fever and was coughing profusely. Desperate, Edward carried her around the house, yelling for her parents to call a doctor. However, she was very small and became increasingly frail. For a moment, Isabella was silent, as if reliving the sadness of the dream, and so she ascended to heaven. When she was gone, Edward screamed loudly. He threw himself on the ground, screaming that he was responsible, that he should have taken better care of her, that he should have stayed home instead of going out to have fun with his friends. Carmen began to cry. The story Isabella told in detail inaccessible to a child was true. During her years working at the mansion, Carmen had uncovered scattered information about the tragedy that struck the family. Laura died at the age of 4 from fulminant meningitis. At the time, Edward was 12 and felt guilty for having gone to play soccer with his friends instead of caring for his sick sister. Upon returning, he found her being rushed to the hospital, where she died 3 days later, without him having the opportunity to say a proper goodbye. How can you be sure of that, Isabella? This story happened over 25 years ago, long before you were born. Isabella shrugged with the disconcerting ease typical of children. "I can't explain it, Mom. I've always known it. And in my dreams, Laura was always crying too. But not because she was sick. She cried because Edward was suffering because of her." "And what was Laura telling you?" Isabella picked up her doll and hugged it, as usual when she was about to tell someone something very important. She claimed she needed to find a very special person to help Edward stop being sad, someone with a good heart who had also experienced sadness, someone who could understand his pain. "And why you, my daughter? Why were you chosen?" Isabella thought for a long time, playing with the doll's hair. Laura said that those who have experienced hardship can better understand the suffering of others. She knew we had also faced difficult times because of Dad's passing. The times when food was scarce, and the moments when you cried in secret. Carmen felt a deep ache in her heart. Carmen was left by Isabella's father when he discovered she was expecting a child. Carmen had raised her daughter alone, working jobs that barely earned her a living. There were moments of utter despair, nights without food, tears of exhaustion and fear that she tried to hide from Isabella. "How do you know about these things? I never talked about your father." "I could sense your sadness, Mom. When you thought of him, your heart felt heavy, and I felt it too. However, Laura told me that some people walk away because they're not strong enough for true love, and that it's never our fault." Carmen hugged Isabella, amazed at the unusual wisdom of this 6-year-old girl. "And what else does Laura say about Edward?" "That he must learn to forgive himself. The guilt he carries is like a heavy stone on his chest, preventing him from breathing properly, being happy and loving others." Isabella yawned and snuggled into her mother's arms. Laura said this was why he became irritable and lonely. Because it's hard to forgive others when we can't forgive ourselves. And when we can't forgive others, it becomes difficult to let people get close. Carmen reflected on all the years she'd worked at the mansion, watching Edward from a distance. Now he understood the reason for his coldness: distance, and inability to establish authentic human connections. He had erected emotional barriers to protect himself from pain, but these same barriers prevented him from embracing love. And do you believe you can help him recover? Laura affirms that children can access places in the heart that adults can no longer reach, because children don't judge, they don't have prejudices, and they're not afraid to love. Isabella snuggled into her mother's arms, resisting sleep. "Mommy, tomorrow will be different. What's this? More of his family will show up at the hospital, and some of them won't like us." Carmen felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. This had crossed her mind too. What would Robert, Margaret, and Donna Sophia's reaction be if they discovered the cleaning lady was visiting Edward daily? What if they thought she was taking advantage of the situation? "Isabella, are you afraid?" "No," she replied with a certainty that surprised Carmen. Laura affirmed that sometimes it takes a lot of courage to do the right thing, and helping Edward is what we should do. "What if his family doesn't allow us to return?" Isabella smiled with that enigmatic look she used to have when she had information the adults didn't yet know. "They're leaving because Edward will start waking up tomorrow, and when he does, he'll ask them to stay by his side." "How are you so sure?" "Because in tonight's dream, he was no longer in the dark house. He was in a lit house where Laura was present, smiling and waving goodbye. He looked at me and said, 'Thank you, Isabella.' Now I know the way back." Carmen carried Isabella back to bed, but she couldn't sleep a wink. While her daughter's words gave her hope, they also left her apprehensive. If Isabella was right and Edward really did wake up the next day, everything would change drastically. Carmen noticed the difference immediately the next morning when they arrived at the Owens Hopkins Hospital. There were more luxury cars in the parking lot, unusual activity in the hallways of Alavipe, and well-dressed people, unfamiliar to her, wandering the upper floors. "The whole family is here today," said Nurse Marina, who had become a silent ally of Isabella's. "His mother arrived early, his brother too, and there are people I've never seen before." "It's because today is a special day," said Isabella, squeezing Carmen's hand with unusual strength. "Today, Edward will realize he's no longer alone." Carmen swallowed hard. If Isabella's prediction came true, they would quickly discover whether the Caldwell family saw them as saviors or opportunists. As they approached room 314, Carmen heard voices coming from the half-open door, voices she recognized from years of working at the mansion, but now sounded charged with an unfamiliar tension. Doctor, are you sure this situation is being handled appropriately? Robert Caldwell always expressed himself formally and in a controlled manner. The medical results are clear, Mr. Caldwell, Dr. Henry replied. Your brother is showing a recovery that defies all our understanding of neurology. Isabella grabbed her mother's skirt. They're scared, Mom, but they don't need to be. When he wakes up, Edward will explain everything to them. Isabella opened the door to room 314 with the unshakable confidence of a child who speaks to angels, ready to face whatever came her way. Isabella whispered something to Edward, and the devices reacted again, this time with even more intensity. Room 314 presented an intimidating scene when Carmen and Isabella arrived. Sophia Caldwell sat in an imported leather armchair brought especially for her, her gloved hands clutching a silk scarf. Robert Caldwell stood beside the bed, wearing a tailored suit even though he was in a hospital. He spoke in a low but authoritative tone to Dr. Henry. Margaret Caldwell disembarked from her early morning flight from Paris. She wore a discreet but obviously expensive black dress. Sunglasses couldn't hide her eyes, swollen from crying, and a rigid posture revealed her discomfort with the situation. And there were other people Carmen didn't know. Edward's cousins, uncles, and co-workers. All were wealthy, well-dressed, and clearly belonged to a world entirely different from hers. As soon as Carmen and Isabella entered, all conversations stopped immediately. Carmen felt the gazes that turned toward them, filled with curiosity, judgment, and distrust, like stabs. "Is this the female?" Margaret asked Robert quietly, but loud enough for Carmen to hear. "The cleaning lady who comes with her daughter every day." Robert made a subtle gesture for silence, but the damage had already been done. Carmen felt her face burn with embarrassment. "Margaret, please," Robert said in a warning tone. "The situation was explained to us by Dr. Henry." Sophia Caldwell looked at Carmen for the first time in her 5 years of service at the mansion. It was a look that analyzed, judged, and sought to understand how a maid had become crucial to her son's recovery. "Is your name Carmen?" Sophia asked, her voice controlled, demonstrating that she was accustomed to being obeyed. "Yes, Mrs. Sophia," Carmen replied, feeling small before all that grandeur. "Robert told me about his daughter's actions toward my Edward." Her voice wavered slightly, revealing the emotion she was trying to hide. "I'd like to see that for myself." Isabella let go of her mother's hand and walked toward Sophia, showing no signs of shyness or fear. It was as if social status had no importance to her. "Are you Edward's mother?" he asked softly. "Yes, dear. And you're Isabella. In Edward's dreams, he talks about you a lot. He said that the lady makes the most delicious chocolate cake in the world, and that, when she moved into her own house, she missed him terribly." Sophia began to cry silently. Did he really say that? She agreed. "He also stated that you always noticed he was sad because of Laura, but you didn't know how to help him. He wants you to know it was never your fault." The room fell completely silent. For decades, Sophia carried the guilt of not being able to help her son cope with the loss of his daughter. She had sought therapists, psychiatrists, traveled, and even moved house. But nothing could lift Edward from the emotional darkness he found himself in. "My boy," Sophia whispered, looking at Edward, who was lying in bed. "My poor boy." Isabella approached the bed and, as usual, took Edward's hand. However, this time, something completely different happened. Not only did the monitors react positively, but Edward also noticeably moved his fingers, gently holding Isabella's small hand. "He squeezed my hand," Isabella exclaimed, with a radiant smile. "He's getting closer, Doctor." Henrique immediately approached to examine his neurological responses. "His eyelids are moving intensely. This is a very positive sign." Everyone in the room approached the bed and looked at Edward intently. Margaret, though initially hostile, seemed genuinely concerned for her brother-in-law. "Edward," Isabella said softly, "your family has arrived. Your mother, your brother, they're all waiting for you to wake up. And Laura asked me to tell you that everything is fine, that she's happy where she is, and that she wishes you to be happy too." Edward's eyelids fluttered more intensely. This time, his fingers twitched more noticeably, and gradually he began to open his eyes. The first face he saw was Isabella's, bending over him with a bright smile. "Hi," she said simply. "You found the exit." Edward tried to speak, but his throat was dry from the tubes that had been removed the previous morning. Dr. Henrique promptly brought water using a syringe. "Slowly," the doctor said. "You were in a coma for a week." After drinking some water, Edward looked around the room and saw that his entire family was gathered. However, his eyes immediately fell on Isabella. You've been with me all this time," Isabella nodded. "Daily. Her mother and brother came too. Everyone was very worried about you." Edward and Robert stared at each other for a long moment. In that moment, decades of hurt and resentment seemed to vanish. "Sorry, bro," Edward murmured, his voice still weak. "No," Robert said, approaching the bed with tears in his eyes. "It's my fault. I should have been here from the beginning." Rising from the armchair, Sophia approached her son and cupped his face with trembling hands. "My son, you have returned to us." "Mom!" Edward exclaimed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry for being so hard to love all these years. And it doesn't matter now," Sophia said, kissing her son's forehead. "What matters is that you're here." However, it was when he looked at Carmen, who was standing discreetly in the corner of the room, that everyone realized the true magnitude of his transformation. "Carmen," he declared, surprising everyone by referring to her by name. "You've arrived. I felt it was necessary to come, Mr. Edward." "Don't call me sir," he said softly. "After everything your daughter has done for me, and considering all the years you were the only person to treat me kindly in that house, we are family." Margaret watched the scene with an expression that combined surprise and possible regret. "Edward," she said, approaching the bed, we had no knowledge about the girl, about what was happening. If we had known, everything is fine." "Margaret," Edward said, looking at Isabella, "this girl showed me that forgiveness is healing for both the one who gives it and the one who receives it." Isabella smiled and snuggled into Edward's arm, as if it was something completely normal. "Laura said she's very proud of you, and that now you can rest in peace, because you won't be sad alone anymore." With what little strength he had left, Edward hugged Isabella. "Thank you, little one, for bringing me back and showing me that family goes beyond blood ties. It's love." Robert approached Carmen, who remained distant, trying to go unnoticed. "Donna Carmen," he said, extending his hand, "I apologize for what my wife said and for the way we've treated her over the years. Your daughter saved my brother, and that saved us as a family." Carmen moved, squeezed his hand. "There's no need to apologize, Mr. Robert." Isabella simply followed her heart. The group approached Dr. Henry, who had watched the entire scene with both medical and human fascination. "What we experienced here today transcends medicine," he stated. Isabella not only helped Edward in his physical recovery, she helped heal the emotional wounds of an entire family. At that moment, other doctors, nurses, and even patients from adjacent rooms gathered discreetly in the hallway, all eager to witness the hospital's miracle. The news had already circulated throughout the institution. The administration began receiving calls from journalists. Doctors from other hospitals were eager to learn more about the case. The story of the girl in the red dress who had awakened the millionaire from his coma was becoming a myth. However, in room 1314, only one thing mattered. A family was reunited, thanks to the unconditional love of a child who believed everyone deserves a new chance at happiness. Isabella looked around at all the important people around her and smiled. Now you can be a real family again. And Edward can teach others how to make the house dark when they feel sad. Edward took Isabella's small hand and looked at his family gathered together. "Do you understand what this means?" he stated more firmly. "This means we still have a lot of work to do, a lot of love to offer, and a lot of people to help." And in that moment, everyone in the room realized their lives would never be the same again. The girl in the red dress didn't just wake a man from a coma. She had inspired an entire family with the transformative power of genuine love. However, the tranquility of that moment would soon be interrupted. One of the relatives demanded that the cleaning lady be fired immediately. However, the joy of the family reunion was suddenly interrupted when the bedroom door was flung open. Dr. Claudio Mendez, the hospital's administrative director, arrived accompanied by 2 security guards and a man in a suit unfamiliar to Carmen. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the doctor said. Mendez, in a formal tone, said, "But there's a matter that needs to be resolved immediately." Edward, still weak but conscious, looked at the director strangely. "What's the matter?" "Doctor?" The man in the suit stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Dr. Reynaldo Costa from the hospital's legal department. We received a formal complaint alleging that the woman Carmen mentioned is exploiting her vulnerable situation for personal gain." "What kind of accusation?" Robert asked, quickly adopting his lawyerly stance. "An anonymous source claims that Mrs. Carmen Smith is manipulating a 6-year-old child, forcing her to pretend to have healing abilities in order to extort money from the Caldwell family." The silence in the room was deathly. Carmen's blood froze in her veins. "This is unacceptable." Sophia exploded, surprising everyone. "My son was saved by this woman and this child, Mrs. Caldwell," Dr. Costa said with feigned patience. "We understand your gratitude. But we must follow our protocols. The unauthorized presence of individuals without family ties with vulnerable patients constitutes a serious violation." Edward tried to get comfortable in bed, but he still felt quite weak. "Dr. Costa, this woman has been serving my family for 5 years. She has full permission to be here." Still, Dr. Costa insisted, the situation has had a negative impact on the hospital. "There are journalists at the entrance and people wanting to get in to see the miracle girl. This is causing operational problems." Isabella, who had remained silent until then, tugged on Dr. Costa's sleeve. "You're scared," she stated with disconcerting sincerity. "In what way?" "I'm not afraid of anything, girl." "Yes, you are. You're afraid people will think your hospital isn't scientific. But healing people with love is also science." The child's penetrating observation clearly made Dr. Costa uncomfortable. "Miss, that's not how things work." "Yes, it does," Isabella confirmed. "Dr. Henry has already evaluated everything. The devices showed that Edward improved when I spoke to him. This is not false. That's correct." Finally, Dr. Henry, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "Doctor, as chief neurologist, I can confirm that all medical data is scientifically valid. The patient's improvement is tangible and documented." Still, the doctor, Costa, stated steadfastly, "For safety and protocol reasons, I'm going to have to ask Mrs. Carmen and her daughter to leave the hospital immediately." "No!" Edward shouted, trying to get out of bed. "They're not going anywhere." Carmen instinctively picked Isabella up as the security guards approached her. "Please," Carmen said, her voice trembling, "we don't want any trouble." "Should we leave?" "No, Mom." Isabella began to shed tears. "Edward still depends on me. He's still learning not to be afraid." The scene was devastating. A 6-year-old child was forced to move away from the one he had rescued, with his entire family watching helplessly. But it was at that moment that something completely unexpected happened. Before the security guards could stop her, Isabella managed to escape her mother's arms and ran back to Edward. Quickly, she climbed onto the bed, lay down beside him, and hugged him tightly. "I won't leave you alone again," she said between sobs. "I promised Laura I'd take care of you." It seemed like the whole hospital had come to a standstill. The security guards hesitated, unsure how to remove a crying child from the arms of a patient who had just come out of a coma. Dr. Costa froze, aware that any rash action could trigger an even more serious crisis. Edward hugged Isabella back and looked at Dr. Costa. "If you forcibly remove this child from here, I will leave the hospital immediately, and I assure you that all of New York City will know why. Mr. Caldwell, Dr. Costa tried to contact you, but you're still recovering. I'm clear enough to make my own decisions," Edward interrupted, "and my choice is that Carmen and Isabella are my family. Anyone who doesn't respect that can look for another job." Robert approached Dr. Costa with an expression that reminded him of why he was one of the most feared lawyers in New York City. "Doctor, my brother is one of the main donors to this hospital. I recommend you re-evaluate your position." Sophia also rose from her chair, exerting all her authority as the matriarch of one of the city's most powerful families. "Dr. Costa, if anyone is exploiting anyone here, it's not them. It's you trying to expel a child who performed a miracle to preserve the hospital's commercial image." Margaret, who had remained silent until then, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Doctor, I have 20 years of experience in public relations. I can say that expelling a child who saved a patient's life would be the worst image disaster this hospital has ever seen." Dr. Henry seized the opportunity to deliver the final blow. Dr. Costa, head of the neurology department, announces that Isabella is included in the experimental treatment that is transforming our perception of neurological recovery. Removing her would be the same as interrupting a medical treatment already underway. Dr. Acosta looked around and realized he was completely alone. The situation seemed to make the security guards uncomfortable. Even Dr. Mendez, the administrative director, subtly indicated that it might be wiser to retreat. Isabella looked at the doctor while still hugging Edward. Costa's eyes were wide and filled with tears. "You don't need to be afraid of me. I just hope people are well. Don't you hope people are well too?" The child's naive question echoed in the silent room. Dr. Costa, a man accustomed to dealing with contracts and protocols, found himself completely disarmed by the genuine sincerity of a 6-year-old girl. "I'm just trying to do my job," he stated, much less firmly than before. "So let me do mine too," Isabella said, with surprising maturity. "My mission is to help Edward find happiness again." At that moment, Dr. Costa realized he was waging an unwinnable war. Not against rules or regulations, but against something far more powerful, the genuine love and firm resolve of a child. "Okay," he finally replied with a sigh of resignation. "However, this needs to be done officially. We'll have to record everything, establish specific protocols, and possibly even conduct a formal investigation." It was the first time Edward smiled since waking up. "Excellent. Let's do this right. Harmon, do you agree to officially participate in a medical study on alternative methods of neurological recovery?" Carmen, still shaken by the whole situation, could only just feel her. Isabella sat up in bed and applauded. "Does this mean I can continue visiting you daily?" "Does it mean you won't have to worry about this anymore?" Edward replied. "Because, as of today, You are official members of the Caldwell family." The room burst into tears of joy. In the hallway, nurses quietly applauded. Dr. Henry smiled, satisfied from both a scientific and human perspective, and Isabella, the girl in the red dress who climbed onto the bed of a comatose millionaire and changed everyone's fate, simply stated, "Laura is very happy now." She stated that her task is complete and that now all she can do is live happily ever after. Dr. Costa left the room shaking his head and muttering something about impossible cases and children who understand more than lawyers. But in room 314, only one thing mattered. An unexpected family had been rescued by unconditional love, and no protocol in the world could separate them again. Edward's eyes began to move for the first time with complete clarity and awareness, observing each person in the room as if seeing them for the first time, not as the bitter man he once was, but as someone reborn through love. The day after the incident with the security guards, when Carmen and Isabella arrived at the hospital, they noticed a completely different atmosphere. Sitting in an armchair beside the bed, Edward was lucid and alert, though still weak. Her eyes shone with a light unseen in decades. Dr. Henry and his entire medical team were present, recording every moment of her remarkable recovery. Seeing Isabella enter, Edward smiled genuinely for the first time in years. "My little savior," he exclaimed, opening his arms to welcome her. Isabella ran to him and nestled into his lap, using her little hands to check if he was indeed okay. "Edward, how are you feeling today?" "I feel reborn," he replied, looking into her eyes. "You've reminded me of what it's like to experience true joy." "Doctor." Henry approached with the most recent test results. "Edward, today's results are simply incredible. Her neurological recovery is occurring at a speed that defies everything we know. It's as if her brain has been completely rebuilt." Edward pulled Isabella closer and looked at Carmen, who remained somewhat distant, still frightened by the whole situation. "Carmen," he said, pulling her close, "you saved me as much as Isabella. In that house, you were the only person who treated me with true kindness for 5 years." Carmen approached timidly. "Mr. Edward." "Don't call me sir," he interrupted gently. "After everything you've done for me, we're like family." Sophia, Robert and Margaret entered the room at that moment. When Sophia spoke directly to Carmen, the atmosphere was charged with emotion. "Carmen," the matriarch declared, tears in her eyes, "I want to ask your forgiveness for all these years I ignored you. Your daughter showed me that value isn't determined by money, but by the generosity of the heart." Robert approached Carmen and offered his hand. "Donna Carmen, my family owes you a huge debt. Isabella not only rescued my brother, but also saved us as a family." Margaret, clearly touched, also approached. "I'm ashamed of the way I behaved at first. You two are angels God sent to our family." Edward took Isabella's hand and faced his family, who were gathered together. "I want to make a proposal," he said. "I want to establish a foundation in honor of my sister Laura, an institution dedicated to helping families facing circumstances similar to ours." Dr. Henry was excited. "Edward, that's an incredible idea." "And Carmen," Edward continued, "I'd like you to take over the coordination of this foundation. You have something no degree can teach, the ability to truly care for people." Carmen couldn't say anything. "Me? I'm not qualified for that." "You have something better," Sophia said. "You have a heart capable of loving." Isabella tugged on Edward's sleeve, as usual when she wanted to communicate something important. "Edward, Laura has something to say." "What does she want to say, my little one?" For a moment, Isabella closed her eyes and concentrated. "She said she's very proud of you for learning the most important lesson. We don't honor those who have passed away by remaining sad forever. We honor them by being happy and helping others. Edward began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. And she said something else. Isabella continued, "Now she can rest in peace, because you will no longer be alone. You have a new family, formed by love." Dr. Isabella was approached by Henrique, who was recording everything. "Isabella, will you continue helping others?" The girl looked at him with the seriousness that sometimes overwhelmed her. "I will help anyone in need. However, Laura taught me that the most important thing isn't having a special talent. It's using the love each individual carries within to help others." She looked at the important people gathered in the room. "You all have the same power as me, the ability to love, to forgive, and to make people feel valued. You just forgot that." Edward hugged Isabella tightly and faced his new family. "Thank you, my little teacher, for showing me that miracles are real and that the greatest of them occurs when lost people find their way back to love." Carmen joined in the embrace, accompanied by the entire Caldwell family. It was there, in that hospital room, that a whole new family came into the world. Not by blood ties, but by the deliberate decision to love one another. Isabella looked up, as if observing something the others couldn't. "Bye, Laura," she whispered. "Thank you for choosing me to help Edward. Now he will live happily ever after." Sophia took Isabella in her arms and hugged her like a real grandmother. "And you, my dear granddaughter, will show us every day how to be a better family." Edward observed his new family. Carmen, who had become something far more than a collaborator. Isabella, responsible for saving his life and his soul. His mother, brother, and sister-in-law, who had rediscovered what truly mattered. "Do you have any idea what we discovered?" he declared in a heartbroken voice. "That family isn't limited to those we're born with. It's who we choose to love. It's who stands by us through our most challenging times. She's the one who never gives up on us." Isabella nodded and smiled radiantly. That was always Laura's goal, demonstrating that love is the most powerful medicine there is. Dr. Henrique watched the scene with both medical and human fascination. "Udom, what we're experiencing here transcends medicine," he stated. "Isabella didn't just treat Edward physically, she helped heal the emotional wounds of an entire family." Robert turned to Dr. Henrique. "Doctor, we want the entire medical community to be aware of this. We hope other patients can have the same opportunity my brother had. We are preparing a scientific publication about the case," replied Dr. Henry. "The Isabella phenomenon will be analyzed in higher education institutions around the world, still weakened but resolute." Edward rose from his chair and walked to the hospital window. The golden afternoon sunlight streamed into the room, illuminating the family united by love. "From today on," he stated, "our mission is to spread this message throughout the world. What wonders happen when we open our hearts to love unconditionally." Isabella ran to the window and took Edward's hand. "And what about Laura? Is she happy?" Edward looked at the girl who changed his life forever. "Laura is more than happy, little one. She's at peace, and we're ready too." That first day, the hospital was filled with a shock that turned into something much greater. The conviction that when a child teaches adults to love without restrictions, miracles become part of everyday life, and families are formed in the most surprising and enchanting ways. That late afternoon at the Owens Hopkins Hospital, there was no longer a presumptuous millionaire, an ignored cleaning lady, or a strange child. There was only a family that chose to love one another, demonstrating that life's greatest treasures are not bought, but rather offered and welcomed with an open heart. And Laura, finally at peace, smiled as she realized her mission was accomplished, and that her brother Edward had discovered not only a cure for her body, but also a definitive cure for her soul, What about you? Do you believe that a child's innocence has the power to touch hearts? Have you ever experienced a time when genuine love transcended all social disparities? Share your experience in the comments. If this story moved you as much as it did me, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our heartwarming stories. And don't forget to check out the next suggested video. A new love story that will surprise you.